Standing in the shadow of the great temple of Karnak, it's impossible not to feel a sense of awe. These colossal stone pillars, some weighing hundreds of tons, rise like giants from the desert floor, perfectly aligned, intricately carved, and standing strong after thousands of years. But here's the thing that will stop you in your tracks. The ancient Egyptians built all of this without a single modern tool. No cranes, no power drills, no steel beams. Just human ingenuity, raw determination, and techniques so advanced, they still leave engineers scratching their heads today. How did they do it? That's the mystery we're about to unravel. One that takes us deep into the heart of one of history's most astonishing architectural achievements. Picture this: teams of workers hauling massive limestone blocks across the desert, fitting them together with precision that rivals our modern laser-guided tools. Think of the sheer-scale temples like Luxor and Abu Simbel, adorned with towering statues and hieroglyphs so precise they look machine-cut, yet every chisel mark, every perfectly placed column was done by hand. The more you learn, the more it feels like magic, but the truth is even more fascinating. Behind these ancient wonders lies a story of brilliant problem-solving, ingenious engineering, and a mastery of materials that allowed these structures to outlast empires. This isn't just a tale of stones and sand. It's a testament to what humans can achieve when creativity meets necessity. The Egyptians didn't just build temples, they built legacies meant to endure eternity. And they did it with methods so effective, we're still uncovering their secrets today. So how did they move those impossibly heavy blocks? What tricks did they use to align their temples with the stars? And why, after thousands of years, do these structures still stand while modern buildings crumble? The answers will change the way you see ancient history, and maybe even inspire you to look at our own world a little differently. Let's step back in time and discover the incredible story behind Egypt's indestructible temples. To understand how the ancient Egyptians moved those colossal stones, we have to look beyond the desert sands to the mighty Nile. This river wasn't just a source of water, it was the ultimate superhighway of the ancient world. Every year, the Nile's predictable floods deposited thick layers of nutrient-rich silt across its banks, turning the soil into a gold mine for construction. Workers mixed this silt with straw to create millions of mud bricks, the backbone of early Egyptian architecture. But the real magic happened when it came to moving the heavy stuff. Imagine granite blocks, each weighing as much as a small house, being loaded onto wooden barges during the flood season. The rising waters allowed these massive vessels to float closer to quarries, reducing the distance workers had to drag stones over land. Engineers dug intricate networks of canals, turning the Nile's natural flow into a precision transportation system. Some of these stones traveled over 400 miles from Aswan's quarries to the temples of Luxor and beyond, all without a single wheel or pulley system as we know them today. And here's the stroke of genius: the Egyptians timed everything to the river's rhythm. When the floods receded, they left behind not just fertile land but also temporary waterways, perfect for floating stones right to a temple's construction site. This wasn't just luck, it was a masterclass in working with nature rather than against it. Without the Nile's relentless cycle, those iconic obelisks and towering columns might never have left the quarries. The river didn't just feed Egypt, it built it. Now, let's step into the quarries where the real magic began. Imagine standing in the blistering heat of Aswan, where the ancient Egyptians sourced some of the finest granite on earth. Without dynamite or diamond-tipped drills, they faced a seemingly impossible task: cutting multi-ton blocks from solid bedrock. Their secret, a brilliant understanding of physics and patience. Workers would identify natural cracks in the stone, then hammer wooden wedges into these weak points. But here's the clever twist: they'd soak the wedges with water. As the wood expanded, the force would split the rock cleanly along the fissure, like nature's own precision tool. Once the initial block was freed, the real artistry began. Teams of craftsmen used copper and bronze chisels, materials far softer than modern steel. But with a relentless sharpening routine, these tools could carve limestone and sandstone with surprising efficiency. For granite, the toughest challenge, they turned to dolerite, a volcanic rock harder than granite itself. Shaped into pounding stones, these dolerite hammers were used to slowly, methodically chip away at the stone, grain by grain. It was a painstaking process, one that could take months for a single obelisk, but the results were flawless. What's truly remarkable is the precision they achieved. These blocks weren't just roughly hewn, they were cut to near-perfect dimensions, with surfaces so smooth they fit together seamlessly. Some quarries still hold half-carved obelisks, abandoned mid-construction, giving us a frozen snapshot of their technique. And here's the kicker: many of these blocks weighed over 50 tons, yet they were shaped and moved with nothing but human muscle and ingenuity. This wasn't brute force, it was a symphony of skill and strategy. The Egyptians didn't just extract stone, they mastered it, turning the earth's bones into monuments meant to last forever. And when you see how these techniques produced stones that still lock together perfectly after millennia, you realize their methods weren't just effective. They were timeless. Now comes the real challenge: how do you move a 70-ton block of granite across miles of desert without wheels, trucks, or even a simple cart? The Egyptians had a solution so elegant, it's still studied by engineers today. Picture a massive wooden sled, its base slick with water or oil, gliding effortlessly over a specially prepared path. That's the secret: lubrication. Workers would dampen the sand or clay ahead of the sledge, creating a near-frictionless surface. Experiments show this simple trick could cut the pulling force needed by half, turning an impossible haul into a manageable task. But it wasn't just about slick surfaces. Teams of laborers, sometimes hundreds strong, would heave on ropes woven from papyrus or flax, materials surprisingly strong for their time. Coordination was key. Overseers likely used rhythmic chants or drum beats to synchronize pulls, ensuring constant momentum. And when the terrain turned uneven, they'd pivot to ramps and levers, lifting blocks inch by inch up inclines. On flat ground, wooden rollers, essentially early versions of ball bearings, spread the weight and kept the sled moving smoothly. What's often overlooked is the sheer scale of these operations. A single obelisk might require months of transport, with crews working in shifts under the scorching sun. Yet they didn't just brute force their way through. The Egyptians mapped routes carefully, avoiding soft sand that could swallow sledges whole. They built temporary roads, compacting the earth to bear the weight. And when obstacles arose, they improvised, using counterweights to pivot stones or even floating them on makeshift rafts through shallow canals. This wasn't just muscle power, it was physics in action. By reducing friction, optimizing angles, and distributing weight, they turned back-breaking labor into a precise science. And the proof: blocks transported this way still sit perfectly aligned in temples today, their edges unbroken by the journey. That's the mark of a system that didn't just work, it mastered the art of moving the unmovable. Raising an obelisk wasn't just about lifting stone, it was a high-stakes balancing act that defied gravity. Picture a slender granite tower taller than a 10-story building, weighing as much as 400 elephants. Now imagine tilting that monolith upright without cranes or steel cables. The Egyptians pulled it off with nothing but ropes, levers, and an ingenious understanding of counterweights. Here's how they likely did it. First, workers would carve the obelisk flat on its side, polishing every inch before attempting to move it. Then came the real test. Teams dug a deep pit beneath the base, lining it with smooth stones to reduce friction. As the obelisk's tip was gradually levered upward, laborers packed the trench beneath it with sand, a clever trick that acted like an adjustable support. By carefully removing sand from one side, they could control the angle of the tilt, inch by painstaking inch. Some researchers believe they went even further, building temporary ramps of compacted earth and sand to guide the obelisk's rise. Imagine a massive slope, meticulously shaped to match the stone's center of gravity. As teams pulled from above with ropes anchored to heavy counterweights, the obelisk would slide into position, its base settling perfectly into a waiting socket. The precision was breathtaking. Many obelisks still stand within fractions of an inch of true vertical, despite millennia of earthquakes and shifting sands. But the real marvel, alignment. These weren't just decorative pillars, they were celestial compasses. The Egyptians positioned obelisks to cast shadows at precise angles during solstices, turning stone into a solar calendar. At Karnak, the shadow of the tallest obelisk would touch specific temple markings only on the longest day of the year. That level of accuracy, achieved with no modern surveying tools, hints at a mastery of astronomy we're still unraveling. What's often forgotten is the human element. This wasn't just engineering, it was endurance. Workers toiled under the sun for months, adjusting ropes, packing sand, and watching for the slightest wobble. One miscalculation could send hundreds of tons crashing down, yet time after time they succeeded, leaving behind monuments that still pierce the sky today. The obelisks of Egypt aren't just stone, they're testaments to patience, teamwork, and a civilization that refused to accept limits. The alignment of Abu Simbel isn't just impressive, it's a celestial feat that still baffles modern architects. Twice a year, on February 22nd and October 22nd, sunlight pierces the temple's inner sanctum, illuminating statues of gods seated in darkness for the rest of the year. This wasn't luck, it was astronomy carved in stone. The Egyptians achieved this precision with tools so simple they'd fit in a child's backpack. A plumb bob, a weighted string, ensured walls were perfectly vertical. Sighting rods, notched sticks aligned with the horizon, helped track the sun's path. And the Merkhit, an early astrolabe, measured angles with stunning accuracy by lining up stars like a celestial ruler. But here's what's truly mind-blowing, their geometry. Take the columns of Luxor Temple. Each one is a mirror image of its neighbor, spaced so evenly that shadows fall in perfect symmetry at noon. Workers likely used knotted ropes to measure intervals, exploiting mathematical ratios we now call the golden mean. They'd stretch a rope between stakes, divide it into segments, and use those proportions to lay out everything from doorways to courtyards. This wasn't guesswork, it was applied mathematics centuries before Pythagoras formalized it. Then there's the masonry. At Karnak, limestone blocks fit so tightly, even today you can't slide a sheet of paper between them. How craftsmen dressed each stone with copper chisels and polishing stones, checking seams with flat wooden guides. They understood something modern builders often forget: friction is your friend. By leaving microscopic ridges, they created a bond so strong, earthquakes couldn't pull them apart. Some joints were even designed to interlock like puzzle pieces, with dovetail cuts hidden inside the stone. But the real genius was in their adaptability. When the ground shifted, as it does over millennia, they built in slack. Columns weren't rigidly fixed. They could sway slightly during tremors, then settle back into place. Foundations were layered with gravel to absorb shocks, and walls, often slightly thicker at the base, distributing weight like a pyramid. These weren't just buildings. They were living systems engineered to dance with the forces of nature rather than resist them. What's humbling is that all this precision served a higher purpose. Temples weren't mere structures, they were cosmic maps. Alignments marked solstices. Doorways framed the rising Sirius, whose appearance heralded the Nile's floods. Even the tilt of a corridor might encode the angle of the sun at a pharaoh's coronation. Every measurement was a prayer in stone, a dialogue with the universe. And the proof is in the sunlight still streaming through Abu Simbel's doors, right on schedule 3,000 years later. That's not just engineering. It's poetry. The image of slaves toiling under the whip to build Egypt's temples is one of history's most persistent myths. But the truth, unearthed from the sands of time, paints a far more fascinating picture. At Deir el-Medina, the village housing the artisans who worked on the Valley of the Kings, archaeologists found something unexpected. Well-built homes, colorful murals, even records of medical treatments and paid sick leave. These weren't shackled laborers, they were skilled craftsmen, treated with respect and compensated for their expertise. Take the payroll records scratched onto pottery shards. Workers received monthly rations of grain, fish, vegetables, and yes, beer, a nutritious staple in ancient Egypt. But it wasn't just about survival. Excavations reveal luxury imports like cedar wood from Lebanon and precious stones, traded as bonuses for exceptional work. And when disputes arose, they didn't suffer in silence. Papyrus scrolls detail the world's first documented labor strike, when tomb builders downed tools over delayed wages and won. The workforce was a finely tuned machine, divided into specialized crews. Quarrymen, haulers, masons, and sculptors each had their role, working in rotating shifts to prevent burnout. Master craftsmen, equivalent to modern-day engineers, oversaw operations, their status reflected in larger homes and elaborate burials. Hieroglyphs even named Czech individual artisans, a rarity in ancient societies where laborers usually faded into anonymity. Perhaps most telling are the tools left behind. Copper chisels, polished by years of use, weren't crude implements but extensions of the craftsman's hands. Workbenches show grooves from repeated sharpening, evidence of pride in precision. And in the temples themselves, hidden signatures, tiny scratches left by masons, suggest a culture where skill was celebrated, not suppressed. This wasn't coercion, it was collaboration. Temples rose not from fear, but from shared purpose. Workers knew their labor would echo through eternity, their names whispered alongside gods and pharaohs. That's why, thousands of years later, their legacy isn't just in stone, it's in the very idea of what human ingenuity, fairly rewarded, can achieve. Climbing the sides of a half-built pyramid, you'd see a landscape transformed, not just by rising stone, but by a sprawling network of ramps, like arteries pumping life into the construction. These weren't simple inclines, they were feats of engineering in their own right. Workers built them layer by layer, using mud brick mixed with desert clay for stability, reinforced with timber beams where needed. Some ramps ran straight up the faces of temples, while others zigzagged at gentle angles to reduce the strain on hauling teams. The choice depended on the structure's height, a steep ramp for shorter projects, a winding path for colossi like the Great Pyramid. But dragging stones uphill was only half the battle. Once a block reached its destined level, the real finesse began. Teams used wooden levers, often just sturdy logs, to nudge stones into perfect alignment. Here's where physics became their silent partner. By placing a lever under a block's edge and pivoting it on a rounded stone or wooden fulcrum, a few workers could lift weights that would stagger a modern forklift. Counterweights, sometimes sacks of sand or smaller stones, added balance, allowing for millimeter adjustments. The Egyptians didn't just move mountains, they danced with them. What's often overlooked is the ramp's life cycle. As a temple grew taller, the ramp evolved, extended upward with fresh layers of brick, or carefully dismantled section by section to reuse materials elsewhere. At sites like the Bent Pyramid, archaeologists have found traces of these temporary roads still embedded in the structure's core, hidden like secrets under polished limestone. And when the final block was set, the ramp vanished, leaving no trace of the struggle behind. The brilliance of this system lay in its adaptability. When a quarry yielded unusually heavy blocks, crews widened the ramps for extra stability. If space was tight, like in the crowded courtyards of Karnak, they built spiral ramps corkscrewing upward. Even the ramp's surface was a study in ingenuity, sprinkled with water to reduce friction, or lined with wooden tracks to guide sledges around sharp turns. Yet the most astonishing detail isn't the ramps themselves, but what they lacked: any permanent infrastructure. Unlike modern cranes, which leave behind bolts and anchors, the Egyptians' tools were ephemeral. The ramps were the ultimate disposable tool, labor-intensive to build, but leaving no scar on the finished monument. That's the paradox of their genius. They achieved permanence through methods that vanished without a trace. And here's the kicker: we're still learning from them. Modern engineers have studied these ramp designs to improve construction in earthquake-prone regions, where flexibility matters more than brute strength. The Egyptians didn't just build for their time, they built for eternity, and in doing so, they handed us a masterclass in problem-solving that resonates across millennia. Their ramps weren't just pathways for stone, they were staircases to the impossible. Run your fingers along the seams of Karnak's towering walls, and you'll feel nothing but smooth stone. No gaps, no crumbling filler, just an almost imperceptible line where one block meets another. This is the hallmark of Egypt's mortarless masonry, a technique so precise it defies logic. Without a single drop of adhesive, the Egyptians engineered stones to lock together like pieces of a giant, three-dimensional puzzle. The secret wasn't just in the cutting, it was in the design. Each block was slightly trapezoidal, wider at the top than the bottom. When stacked, gravity pulled them into an ever tighter embrace, creating a self-reinforcing structure that grew stronger under its own weight. But the real magic happens when the ground shakes. Modern buildings, rigidly glued together with mortar, often crack under seismic stress. Egypt's dry stone temples. They dance. During earthquakes, the blocks shift microscopically, sliding, rotating, even bouncing, then settle back into place like a self-healing mosaic. At Luxor, archaeologists found evidence of ancient tremors in the form of subtly displaced columns. Yet the temple still stands because those movements were absorbed by thousands of tiny adjustments across the structure. It's the architectural equivalent of a tree bending in the wind rather than snapping. How did they achieve such precision? Craftsmen used a system of measurement so accurate, their margin of error was often less than a millimeter. Copper chisels and sandstone polishing tools were just the start. They employed something called the bait method, where master masons carved reference grooves into the first layer of stones. Each subsequent block was then shaped to match these grooves, ensuring uniformity across thousands of tons of limestone. Some joints were so tight, they created a vacuum seal. Try pulling apart two wet glass plates, and you'll feel the same suction that locks Egyptian stones in place. The most astonishing examples hide in plain sight. Take the Valley Temple of Khafre, where granite blocks weighing 80 tons fit together with seams thinner than a credit card. Or the Osirian at Abydos, its massive sandstone slabs interlocked with hidden dovetail keys, wooden or stone tabs inserted into slots. invisible from the outside. These weren't just construction tricks, they were fail-safes. If a block shifted too far, the key would catch it, preventing catastrophic collapse. What's often overlooked is the sound. Walk through a mortarless corridor at dawn, and you might hear something eerie. The faint creak of stones breathing as temperature changes make them expand and contract. These temples aren't silent monuments, they're living structures, whispering the secrets of their resilience across millennia. And that's the ultimate lesson. The Egyptians didn't just build to last. They built to adapt, crafting stones so perfectly matched that time itself couldn't pull them apart. Walk through the towering gateway of an Egyptian temple, and you're not just entering a building, you're stepping into a living map of the universe. Every curve, every carving, every shadow was placed with sacred intention. Those towering columns, they weren't just supports, they were stone forests. Carved to mimic the bundled stems of papyrus or the blooming petals of lotus plants, they transformed architecture into a hymn to creation itself. The lotus, emerging pristine from murky waters, symbolized rebirth. The papyrus, thriving in the Nile's fertile marshes, stood for life's abundance. Even the paint choices whispered meaning: vibrant blues for the heavens, greens for renewal, gold for the flesh of the gods. But the symbolism ran deeper than decoration. The temple's very layout was a cosmic blueprint. Passing through the outer courtyards, you'd move from bright sunlight into deepening shadow, mirroring the journey from the mortal world toward the divine. The floor gradually rose, the ceiling dipped lower, each step elevating you spiritually while compressing the space, as if the universe itself were focusing its energy toward the sanctuary. And there, in the holiest chamber, sat the shrine, a miniature version of the primordial mound, the first land to emerge from chaos at the dawn of time. This wasn't just architecture, it was theology in 3 dimensions. The walls told stories in stone. Scenes of pharaohs offering wine to Ammon or Hathor weren't mere art, they were eternal rituals, frozen in time so their magic would never end. Even the poses held meaning. Figures striding forward represented action, while seated statues embodied stability, and the hieroglyphs, they were more than words. A carved ankh wasn't just the symbol for life, it was a conduit for life's energy, pulsing through the temple like a heartbeat. Perhaps most astonishing was how this symbolism shaped construction. Builders didn't just align temples to the stars for show. They believed the gods' power flowed along those celestial pathways. A doorway angled to catch the sunrise on a king's birthday wasn't vanity. It was a sacred recharge, bathing the shrine in solar energy. Even the cracks between stones had purpose. Some were designed to let moonlight filter through on specific nights, casting divine silhouettes on inner walls. This spiritual precision blurs the line between engineering and worship. Modern architects might prioritize function over form, but for the Egyptians, function was form. Every measurement, every material chosen to please the gods. That's why these temples feel alive. You're not just looking at history, you're standing inside a prayer, one that's been echoing through stone for 5,000 years. And when dawn light strikes the sanctuary just so, or the stars align above a hidden corridor, you realize they didn't just build for humans, they built for eternity. Standing in the hypostyle hall of Karnak at dawn, you'd witness something extraordinary: sunlight slicing through the forest of columns, illuminating specific carvings only on the winter solstice. This wasn't an accident, it was celestial engineering. The Egyptians didn't just observe the stars, they wove them into the very fabric of their temples. Take the alignment of Luxor's main axis. It points directly toward the Nile's annual flood peak, a lifeline for agriculture. But here's the twist. The temple's position also frames the rising of Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, whose appearance signaled the flood's arrival. Two natural events, one architectural solution, a perfect marriage of earth and sky. The precision goes deeper than sight lines. Carved into temple walls are diagonal star clocks, grids that track the nightly movement of constellations. Priests used these not just for rituals but as agricultural calendars. When certain stars aligned with temple notches, it was time to plant or harvest. At Abu Simbel, the inner sanctum statues sit in darkness 362 days a year, but on the pharaoh's birthday and coronation day, sunlight pierces 60 meters through the mountain to bathe them in light. Modern simulations show these dates weren't arbitrary. They matched the heliacal rising of key stars, turning stone into a cosmic clock. Then there's the geometry. The so-called golden ratio, a mathematical proportion found in nature from seashells to galaxies, appears repeatedly in temple designs. The Parthenon gets all the credit, but Karnak's pylons and courtyards follow the same 1.618 ratio centuries earlier. The difference, the Greeks formalized it with equations. The Egyptians discovered it through ropes and stakes. Stretch a cord between 2 points, divide it by instinctive harmony, and you've got architecture that pleases the eye on a primal level. Even more fascinating are the hidden triangles. The Great Pyramid slope is famous, but less known are the Pythagorean triples embedded in temple doorways, right-angled triangles with whole number sides, like 3, 4, 5 or 5, 12, 13. These weren't abstract math, they were practical tools. Builders would knot ropes at these intervals to guarantee perfect square corners. A 3, 4, 5 triangle's right angle ensured obelisks stood vertical and walls met precisely. The irony, Pythagoras wouldn't discover this theorem for another 2,000 years. What's often overlooked is the human element behind these feats. Priests weren't just stargazers, they were data collectors. Generations recorded celestial patterns on papyrus, noting subtle shifts over centuries. When they aligned a new temple, they weren't just matching current stars, they accounted for precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that changes stellar positions over millennia. That's why some alignments seem off today. The stars have literally moved. This celestial choreography served a profound purpose. In Egyptian belief, temples weren't just buildings, they were microcosms of the universe. The ceiling symbolized the sky goddess Nut, painted with stars. Floors represented the primordial waters, their undulating patterns mimicking the Nile's flow. Even the columns told a story. Their bundled papyrus designs evoked the marsh where creation began. Every alignment, every ratio was a thread connecting humanity to the cosmic order. And the proof of their success: stand at Karnak during the summer solstice, and you'll see what they saw. Sunlight threading the needle between columns, just as it did 30 centuries ago. No batteries, no gears, just stone and sky in perfect sync. That's the genius of Egyptian astronomy. They didn't just build temples, they built time machines. The Egyptians didn't need complex equations to build their temples. They turned everyday math into an art form. Picture a worker holding a knotted rope, stretching it taut between two stakes to mark a perfect right angle. This simple tool, called a rope stretcher, was their version of a modern surveyor's theodolite. By tying knots at precise intervals, 3 units, 4 units, 5 units, they created a triangle where the longest side guaranteed a square corner. No textbooks, no abstract formulas, just hands-on geometry that shaped the most precise structures of the ancient world. But their math went far beyond ropes. The Rind mathematical papyrus, a 3,000-year-old scroll, reads like a contractor's manual. It shows how they calculated volumes of grain stores, skills easily adapted to measuring stone blocks. Instead of fractions as we know them, they used unit fractions, splitting quantities into halves, thirds, fourths, all the way down to tiny fractions like 1/64th. This might seem cumbersome, but it was brilliantly practical. Need to divide a block of limestone into 7 equal parts. The papyrus spells it out. Take half plus a quarter plus an eighth plus a 64th. The result, perfectly proportioned stones every time. Then there was the cubit rod, their universal measuring stick, typically about 52 centimeters long. These rods were standardized across Egypt, ensuring every quarry and construction site used identical units. Some rods even had subdivisions, marking palms and fingers for finer measurements. Imagine the coordination this required. Teams hundreds of miles apart cutting stones to the same specifications, with no digital calipers or laser guides. A block quarried in Aswan would fit seamlessly into a temple wall in Thebes, all because a wooden rod kept everyone in sync. Their genius lay in turning limitations into strengths. Without calculus, they mastered slopes by trial and error, adjusting ramp angles until sledges could haul stones without tipping. Without trigonometry, they used shadows to gauge heights, a technique still taught in basic surveying classes today. At the bent pyramid, you can see this learning curve etched in stone. Its lower half rises at a steep 54 degrees, but when cracks appeared, builders switched to a gentler 43-degree slope mid-construction. That's empirical engineering at its finest, observing, adapting, and solving problems in real time. What's often overlooked is how deeply math intertwined with their spirituality. The number 4 symbolized the cardinal directions, 7 represented cosmic order, and the sacred ratio of 1.618, now called the golden mean, appeared in everything from column heights to temple layouts. These weren't just aesthetic choices, they were acts of devotion, weaving numerical harmony into the fabric of the divine. The proof of their system's brilliance isn't in the papyri, it's in the stones themselves. At the Temple of Horus in Edfu, the central axis deviates from true north by less than half a degree. Not bad for a culture without compasses. Or consider the pyramids. Their bases are level to within 2 centimeters, despite covering areas larger than a football field. That precision didn't come from guesswork. It came from generations of craftsmen passing down tricks of the trade, how to check levels with water-filled trenches, or use the sun's shadow to track alignment. This was math without chalkboards, engineering without blueprints. Every calculation served a purpose, every measurement told a story. And when you see a temple doorway where the height exactly equals its width times the square root of 2, you realize they weren't just building. They were composing a symphony in stone with numbers as their notes. Beneath the grand courtyards and towering statues of Egypt's temples lies a hidden network of waterways, an ancient answer to one of the desert's cruelest ironies. Even in a land where rain falls only a handful of times each year, flash floods could unleash torrents powerful enough to erode stone. The Egyptians didn't just brace against these rare deluges, they engineered solutions so effective, modern architects still study them today. Take the Temple of Hatshepsut at Deir el-Bahri, where discrete channels carved into the limestone terraces redirected rainwater away from critical areas. These weren't crude ditches, they were mathematically graded. Their slopes calculated to keep water moving just fast enough to prevent pooling but slow enough to avoid erosion. At Philat Temple, the challenge was even greater. Built on an island in the Nile, the structure faced annual floods that could submerge entire walls. Engineers responded with a dual strategy. First, they constructed a temporary coffer dam, a ring of tightly packed reeds and mud to divert water during construction. Then, once the temple rose, they integrated permanent canals that acted like relief valves, allowing floodwaters to flow around the sacred precinct rather than through it. The precision was staggering. Some canals featured adjustable stone gates, letting priests control water levels like ancient engineers at a control panel. But water management wasn't just about defense. In the Temple of Calm Ambo, dedicated to both Horus the falcon god and Sobek the crocodile god, twin basins collected rainwater for ritual purification. These reservoirs weren't mere cisterns. They were designed with sedimentation channels where sand and debris would settle before the cleaner water reached the inner chambers. Archaeologists even found traces of natron salt in these basins, evidence that priests used them to prepare mummification materials, turning a practical system into a sacred tool. The real stroke of genius, though, lay beneath the foundations. Many temples sat on elevated platforms lined with layers of sand and gravel, an early version of modern French drains. When rare rains came, moisture would seep through the stone flooring, hit this porous layer, and evaporate harmlessly before it could weaken the structure. At Edfu, the gap between the inner and outer walls wasn't just for show. It created an air pocket that prevented rising damp from the Nile's groundwater. What's truly remarkable is how these systems blended invisibly with sacred spaces. Drainage channels often doubled as offering conduits, funneling ritual liquids like milk or wine into the earth. At Karnak, hidden spouts disguised as lions' mouths, symbols of protection, spat excess water safely away from delicate reliefs. This wasn't just engineering, it was alchemy, transforming a practical necessity into an act of worship. The lesson here goes beyond stone and water. These temples survived not because they resisted nature, but because they listened to it. Every canal, every slope, every hidden channel was a conversation with the environment, one that balanced human ambition with humility. And when you see how these structures endure, their colors still vivid after millennia in a land of extremes, you realize the Egyptians didn't just build for the dry seasons. They built for the storms. Before Imhotep, Egyptian kings were buried under simple mud brick mounds until one man saw a grander vision. The step pyramid of Djoser didn't just break tradition, it shattered the limits of what architecture could be. Imagine the audacity it took to stack 6 massive stone tiers toward the sky, creating a structure so revolutionary, it became the blueprint for every pyramid and temple that followed. But Imhotep wasn't just stacking stones, he was rewriting the rules. By abandoning fragile mud brick for durable limestone, he didn't just build a tomb, he built a manifesto in stone, declaring that monuments could defy time itself. What's often overlooked is how experimental this process was. The pyramid step design wasn't some grand pre-planned scheme, it evolved as construction unfolded. Archaeologists discovered that the initial structure was a modest single-story mastaba, but Imhotep kept pushing boundaries, adding layer upon layer like a sculptor refining his masterpiece. His use of load-bearing walls was a game-changer. Earlier builders relied on solid mounds of earth, but Imhotep realized that carefully angled stone layers could distribute weight more efficiently, allowing for taller, more stable structures. The result, a 200-foot-tall marvel that still dominates the Saqqara skyline nearly 5,000 years later. Then there were the columns, another stroke of genius. Before Djoser's complex, most supports were simple wooden posts or bundled reeds. Imhotep's stone replicas of these organic forms were more than decorative, they were structural breakthroughs. His fluted columns, designed to mimic papyrus stalks, proved that stone could emulate nature while bearing unimaginable weight. Walk through the pyramid's colonnaded entrance today, and you're tracing the footsteps of an idea that would echo through Greek and Roman architecture millennia later. But Imhotep's brilliance extended beyond blueprints. As high priest of Ra and royal physician, he saw no divide between science and the sacred. His medical texts, some of the oldest ever found, show a mind equally at home diagnosing ailments and designing temples. This holistic thinking shaped his architecture. The step pyramid wasn't just a tomb, it was a healing machine for the soul. Its aligned corridors channeling celestial energy to guide the pharaoh's resurrection. Every measurement, every angle served both engineering and cosmic harmony. The ultimate testament to his legacy, he became a god. Centuries after his death, Egyptians worshipped Imhotep alongside deities like Thoth and Isis, a rare honor for a mortal. Pilgrims left offerings at his shrines, seeking cures for illness and wisdom for impossible tasks. Even the Greeks equated him with their god of medicine, Asclepius. That's the mark of true innovation, when your name outlasts stone, when your ideas transcend their time so completely that they become eternal. The step pyramid was just the beginning. Every temple that followed, from Karnak to Abu Simbel, owes a debt to the world's first architect, a man who taught humanity how to build for forever. The great temple of Ammon at Karnak has felt the earth tremble beneath its foundations for over 3,000 years, yet it stands unshaken. While modern cities crumble under far less seismic stress, these ancient stone giants sway like reeds in the wind, then settle back into perfect alignment. The secret lies in a principle modern engineers are only now fully appreciating. Flexibility beats rigidity. Walk through any Egyptian temple, and you'll notice something unusual about the doorways. They're not rectangular but trapezoidal, wider at the base than the top. This wasn't just an aesthetic choice. When tremors hit, the angled sides guide the structure's movement, distributing force along the walls rather than letting it concentrate at vulnerable corners. It's the architectural equivalent of bending your knees during an earthquake instead of locking your legs. Then there are the walls themselves, massive sandstone blocks stacked without mortar, each one free to shift microscopically during a quake. Unlike modern concrete buildings that crack under tension, these dry joints act like shock absorbers. At Luxor Temple, archaeologists found evidence of ancient seismic activity in the form of slightly offset blocks. But here's the miracle. Instead of collapsing, the wall simply danced in place, then settled back into near-perfect alignment. This self-healing quality comes from the Egyptians' understanding of friction. By polishing mating surfaces to an almost glassy smoothness, they ensured blocks would slide rather than stick, then lock back together when the shaking stopped. But the real genius might be what's missing. Notice how few temples have heavy stone roofs spanning wide spaces. The Egyptians preferred open courtyards or forests of closely spaced columns, creating lightweight ceilings that wouldn't crush the structure if walls shifted. At the Ramesseum, the central hall's roof was likely made of wooden beams and lightweight plaster, materials that could collapse without triggering a catastrophic chain reaction. Even when stone ceilings were used, as in the hypostyle hall at Karnak, they were split into small sections supported by dense clusters of columns. This segmentation created natural failure points where damage could be contained. Material choice played a starring role too. While modern concrete degrades within decades, the Egyptian sandstone and granite have a crystalline structure that resists fatigue. Quarried from bedrock with natural fracture lines, these stones were essentially pre-stressed by geological forces, making them inherently tougher than anything cast in a factory today. And let's not forget location. Temples were often built on stable bedrock outcrops rather than loose soil, avoiding the liquefaction that devastates modern cities built on landfill. The ultimate test came in 1992 when a 5.8 magnitude quake struck near Cairo. Modern buildings collapsed by the dozen, yet the Giza pyramids, after 4.5 millennia, barely lost a stone. Nearby, the Sphinx's temple showed cracks but held firm, its interlocking granite blocks doing exactly what the builders intended, moving as one, then settling back into harmony. That's the paradox of Egyptian engineering. By designing structures that could bend, they created monuments that would never break. What modern architects call base isolation and energy dissipation, cutting-edge seismic techniques today the Egyptians were practicing when Rome was still a village. Their temples weren't just built to last, they were built to dance with the earth itself, swaying to a rhythm only stone can hear. And when the ground finally stills, they do what they've always done: stand tall, silent witnesses to a civilization that mastered time not by resisting nature's forces, but by moving with them. Look closely at the walls of Deir el-Bahri or the tombs of the nobles, and you'll find something extraordinary. Not just scenes of gods and pharaohs, but snapshots of construction crews in action. These hieroglyphic how-to guides show workers hauling ropes in unison, craftsmen chiseling hieroglyphs with copper tools, and scribes jotting down inventories on papyrus. One particularly vivid tableau at Saqqara depicts a team maneuvering a colossal statue using nothing but wooden sledges and levers, their poses frozen mid-strain. These aren't just artistic flourishes, they're technical diagrams disguised as art, preserving knowledge across generations. The administrative records are even more illuminating. Papyrus fragments from Wadi al-Jarf, the world's oldest surviving harbor, detail shipments of limestone from Tura to Giza down to the number of blocks per barge and the daily rations for crews. One ledger notes the arrival of 42 boats carrying fine white stone, with the precision of a modern logistics report. Another lists work shifts by the hour, showing rotations designed to prevent exhaustion under the desert sun. This wasn't ad hoc labor, it was a finely tuned operation with supply chains rivaling today's mega projects, but the real treasure lies in the temple workshops. Scenes from Luxor show artisans testing materials like ancient quality control inspectors rubbing stones together to check for smoothness, using plumb bobs to verify angles, even mixing pigments in precise ratios for wall paintings. At Karnak, a rarely noticed corner carving reveals workers pouring water into carved channels, likely testing drainage systems before final installation. These weren't just builders, they were problem solvers documenting their experiments in stone. What's often missed is the storytelling in these records. A damaged stela from Amarna describes a crisis when a quarry vein collapsed, forcing engineers to recalculate their entire block inventory. The text doesn't hide the setback, it celebrates the solution, praising the overseer who rerouted shipments from a backup quarry. This transparency hints at a culture that valued knowledge sharing over secrecy, where mistakes were lessons carved alongside triumphs, the most telling detail. The hieroglyph for architect shows a kneeling man unrolling a papyrus, proof that blueprints existed long before paper. While none survive, temple walls preserve their essence. At Edfu, the foundation ceremony scene includes a priest stretching a cord between stakes, mirroring the exact ritual described in later Greek texts. This wasn't mysticism, it was surveying, encoded in sacred imagery. The Egyptians didn't just build temples, they wrote the manual in stone, in ink, and in the very bones of their architecture. And now, as we decipher these messages across millennia, we're not just uncovering techniques, we're meeting the minds behind them, the scribe who noted a crack in a granite slab, the foreman who tallied the day's progress, the artist who sketched a worker's calloused hands. Their voices, once lost in the sands, are finally being heard again. Deep beneath the sands of Saqqara lies a chamber that defies logic, the Serapeum, where 25 granite sarcophagi rest in shadowy silence. Each one is a monolithic puzzle, carved from a single block of rose granite so precisely that their lids slide shut with the smoothness of a modern airlock. The numbers alone boggle the mind. Boxes weighing as much as a space shuttle, their inner surfaces polished to a mirror finish, with corners so sharp they could slice paper. Mainstream archaeology tells us copper saws and quartz sand abrasives achieved this, but stand in that underground gallery running your fingers along a seam thinner than a razor blade, and you'll understand why debates about lost technologies persist. The real shock isn't the weight, it's the geometry. These aren't simple rectangles, their interiors feature complex compound curves, with recesses that follow mathematical arcs modern architects would struggle to replicate without CNC machines. One sarcophagus lid, when measured with laser scanners, showed deviations of less than 0.02 of an inch across its entire 9-foot length. That's not just precision, it's obsession. And here's the twist: granite is one of the hardest stones on Earth, ranking just below diamond on the Mohs scale. Copper tools, even with abrasive sand, would require lifetimes of labor to achieve such finishes. Yet the Serapeum's boxes show no telltale marks of trial and error, just flawless execution, as if the craftsmen had some undisclosed shortcut. Then there's the logistics. The granite came from Aswan, over 500 miles upriver, meaning these 70-ton blocks were quarried, shaped, transported, and lowered into underground tunnels with no room for error. Contemporary reliefs show workers using wooden sledges and ropes, but the Serapeum's narrow passageways leave no space for such methods. Some theorists propose the boxes were cast like concrete, a controversial idea, yet the absence of tool marks on certain surfaces keeps the question alive. But perhaps the most haunting detail is what's missing. These sarcophagi were never meant for humans. They held the mummies of Apis bulls, sacred animals worshipped as incarnations of Ptah. The smallest box could fit 3 adult men lying down, yet each was crafted with the same inhuman precision. Why pour such unimaginable effort into containers for animals? Unless, of course, the precision itself was the point, a physical manifestation of devotion where perfection became prayer. Standing in that silent hall, you're left with 2 possibilities. Either we've drastically underestimated the patience and skill of ancient artisans, or somewhere in the shadows of history, a technique was lost, a secret so effective it turned stone into putty. Either way, the Serapeum doesn't just challenge our assumptions, it whispers that there's still much we don't know about how or why the ancients built the impossible. Walking into the Temple of Hathor at Dendera is like stepping into a time machine. The walls glow with blues as deep as the Mediterranean and greens as vibrant as the Nile's banks. These aren't faded relics, they're explosions of color that have defied time for over 2,000 years. The secret, a masterclass in chemistry and environmental engineering. Take that iconic Egyptian blue, a pigment so stable, modern scientists struggle to replicate its durability. Artists ground lapis lazuli into powder, then mixed it with calcium carbonate and silica, firing the blend at precise temperatures to create a crystal structure that repels moisture and resists fading. This wasn't just paint, it was nanotechnology in antiquity, but the real genius lay in application. Before brushing a single stroke, craftsmen etched designs deep into stone, creating recesses that sheltered pigments from wind and sunlight. Then came the binder's egg whites, beeswax, or plant gums, which sealed pigments into the stone's pores like natural epoxy. At Karnak, traces of these organic glues still linger, their molecular structure preserved by the very dryness that mummified pharaohs. The Egyptians didn't just slap color on walls, they engineered layered systems. Infrared scans reveal some murals have up to 5 thin coats, a base layer of gypsum for smoothness, followed by washes of diluted pigment for gradients, finished with resin varnishes that acted like ancient UV filters. Climate played an unsung role too. The desert's low humidity prevented mold from eating organic binders, while temperature fluctuations that crack modern paints were mitigated by stone's thermal mass. Even the positioning of artwork was strategic. Scenes facing north, like those in Luxor's inner sanctuaries, received indirect light, sparing them the bleaching fury of the midday sun. What's often overlooked is the intentionality behind every hue. Red ochre, mined from desert cliffs, symbolized life and victory. Its iron oxide content made it naturally resistant to fading. Green malachite, representing fertility, was often mixed with copper salts, an accidental preservative that inhibited microbial growth. Even the blacks, made from charred bone or vine, contained carbon so inert it's virtually immortal. This wasn't just decoration, it was alchemy, where every color carried meaning and science in equal measure. The proof of their success: compare Egyptian murals to Renaissance frescoes. While Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel required a 2-decade restoration, the Temple of Seti's colors remain vivid with nothing but time's gentle touch. That's the legacy of builders who didn't just create art, they engineered eternity. Egyptian architecture may seem like a world unto itself, but look closer and you'll spot the fingerprints of distant lands woven into its stones. Just south of Egypt, the Nubians built pyramids so steep they seemed to pierce the sky, angles far sharper than Egypt's classic slopes. When Egyptian architects ventured into Nubia, they didn't just impose their style, they took notes. The pyramid at Nuri, built for the pharaoh Taharqa, showcases this cultural exchange. Its dramatic incline isn't an accident, it's a deliberate nod to Nubian design, proving Egypt's builders were keen observers of what worked beyond their borders. Then came the Persians in the 6th century BCE, bringing with them towering columned halls inspired by their palaces at Persepolis. At the Temple of Hibis in the Karga oasis, you'll find something unexpected: fluted columns capped with palm frond designs, a hybrid of Egyptian tradition and Persian grandeur. Even the lotus, that most iconic of Egyptian symbols, might not be purely homegrown. Scroll through Mesopotamian reliefs from 2,000 years earlier, and you'll spot similar floral motifs adorning the thrones of Sumerian kings. Whether through trade or conquest, the idea seems to have drifted down the Nile, evolving into the lotus capitals that became Egypt's signature. The Greeks left their mark too. When Alexander's generals took control, they didn't erase Egyptian style, they fused it. At the Temple of Edfu, the towering pylon gates remain distinctly Egyptian, but peek inside and you'll spot something new. Corinthian columns hiding in the shadows, their acanthus leaves curling beside traditional papyrus design. Even the famed Rosetta Stone, carved under Greek Ptolemaic rule, is an architectural chameleon. Its text appears in 3 scripts, a physical metaphor for cultural blending. What's fascinating isn't just that Egypt borrowed ideas, but how they transformed them. The Nubian steep pyramid became a statement of power for Taharqa. Persian columned halls were adapted to house Egyptian gods rather than kings, and those Mesopotamian floral motifs, they were refined into something uniquely Egyptian. The lotus wasn't just decoration. It symbolized rebirth, rising pristine from murky waters each dawn. This wasn't imitation, it was alchemy, turning foreign elements into something that served Egypt's vision. The lesson here goes beyond stone and mortar. These adaptations reveal a civilization confident enough to absorb outside influences without losing itself. While later cultures like the Romans often imposed their styles wholesale, Egyptian architects were selective curators, blending only what enhanced their traditions. That's why, even with these foreign threads woven in, an Egyptian temple never feels like anything but Egyptian. The genius wasn't in purity, it was in knowing exactly what to keep, what to borrow, and how to make it all sing in harmony. By the time Roman legions marched into Egypt, the great age of temple construction had already begun to wane. The last monumental pharaonic project, the Temple of Isis at Philae, was completed under Roman rule, but its columns stood as a lonely swan song rather than the start of a new era. As imperial priorities shifted, the once endless procession of stone from a swan's quarries slowed to a trickle. The meticulous craftsmen who could cut granite with copper saws and align doorways with the stars became a dying breed, their knowledge slipping away like sand through an hourglass. Yet, even in decline, these temples refused to vanish quietly. When Christianity swept across Egypt in the 4th century, many were reborn as churches, their hieroglyphs plastered over, their sanctuaries echoing with new prayers. At Luxor, the great hypostyle hall became part of a Coptic church, its towering papyrus columns now framing crosses instead of cartouches. The faithful saw no contradiction in this transformation. To them, these enduring stones were merely waiting for a new divine purpose. Meanwhile, desert winds silently buried other temples like Dendera, preserving their colors under protective dunes until Napoleonic explorers would brush the sand away centuries later. What's remarkable isn't that temple building stopped, it's how long the knowledge lingered. Coptic masons, though working in brick and mortar, still laid their churches on east-west axes like their pharaonic forebears. The curve of a dome might echo the vault of the sky goddess Nut. A frescoed saint could stand where a statue of Osiris once did. In the monasteries of the Wadi Natron, you'll find stone capitals carved with crosses, but look closely, and the shadow of lotus blossoms lingers in their curves. The ultimate testament to the builder's success lies in what happened when maintenance ceased. Unlike Roman concrete, which crumbled without constant care, Egypt's mortarless masonry simply settled into new equilibriums. Earthquakes that flattened later cities made these temples sway like reeds before settling back into alignment. Flash floods that eroded medieval walls rolled harmlessly over sloping temple foundations. Even the Nile's shifting course, which drowned entire neighborhoods of Alexandria, only lapped at the feet of Karnak's towering pylons. When Napoleon's savants first measured the pyramids in 1798, they assumed such precision must be the work of a lost super-civilization. They couldn't fathom that these structures were the endpoint of 3,000 years of refinement, not the product of some forgotten golden age. The truth was simpler and more profound. The Egyptians had solved problems we're still grappling with today. They built for a timescale we can barely comprehend, not for decades, but for millennia. And when you stand in the shadow of Edfu's nearly intact walls, watching sunset light bounce off reliefs carved when Rome was just a village, you realize they didn't just outlast empires. They outlasted time itself. When the rising waters of Lake Nasser threatened to swallow Abu Simbel whole in the 1960s, the world faced an impossible choice: let the temples drown or perform the largest archaeological rescue mission in history. What followed was nothing short of an engineering marvel. Teams from across the globe painstakingly sawed the 4 colossal statues of Ramses II into over 1,000 blocks, each weighing up to 30 tons, then reassembled them 65 meters higher like the world's most intricate jigsaw puzzle. The operation took 4 years, required custom-built cranes, and even involved constructing an artificial mountain to mimic the original cliffside setting. This wasn't just preservation, it was time travel, using 20th century technology to honor ancient vision. Today's conservators wield even more advanced tools, yet face deeper philosophical questions. Laser scanners now map every millimeter of temple walls, revealing hairline cracks invisible to the naked eye. At Karnak, these scans detected a creeping tilt in the hypostyle hall's columns, a discovery that prompted hidden reinforcements before collapse became inevitable. Meanwhile, 3D printers in Luxor's conservation labs extrude exact replicas of eroded hieroglyphs, allowing artisans to study fragile originals while displaying perfect facsimiles for visitors. The precision is staggering. Some reproductions capture tool marks left by artisans 30 centuries ago, right down to the angle of individual chisel strokes. But technology can't resolve the central dilemma haunting every restoration: how much should we intervene? At Medinet Habu, conservators deliberately left Napoleon's soldiers' graffiti alongside Ramses III's battle scenes, preserving layers of history in one tableau. Yet at Dendera, vigorous cleaning in the 1990s accidentally stripped away ancient pigment layers, sparking outrage. The debate divides experts. Some argue temples should appear as they did in their heyday, vibrant with color and crisp edges. Others insist every scratch and stain tells a story, that to erase weathering is to disrespect time itself. What's often overlooked is how these modern struggles echo the ancients' own choices. Just as today's teams debate whether to reinforce crumbling stones with titanium rods, the original builders faced similar trade-offs. At Edfu, archaeologists found evidence that priests periodically reapplied gold leaf to statues, refreshing their divine radiance. But they also left some cracks unrepaired, perhaps seeing beauty in imperfection, or recognizing that some forces, even gods, must bow to. The ultimate lesson lies in the temple's silent endurance. Whether scanned by lasers or tended by priests, these stones have always demanded one thing: humility. To preserve them isn't to conquer time, but to join a conversation that began when the first block was laid. And when you see Abu Simbel statues at dawn, their faces lit by the same sun that touched them 33 centuries ago, you realize preservation isn't about freezing the past. It's about keeping its heartbeat alive. The notion that Egypt's temples were built with help from aliens or lost super-civilizations speaks to something deeper than just curiosity. It's a testament to how mind-bending these achievements still are. When you stand before the Great Pyramid's 2.3 million blocks, each weighing as much as an elephant, the idea that copper tools and rope could accomplish this feels almost laughable. That disbelief is where conspiracy theories take root. Take the so-called melted stone hypothesis, the idea that some temple blocks were softened with an unknown technology and molded like clay. Proponents point to stones at Sacsayhuaman in Peru and the Osirian in Egypt, where joints fit so tightly they appear fused. But here's what gets lost in the speculation: the Egyptians left behind receipts. Quarries like Aswan are littered with half-finished obelisks, their surfaces covered in clear chisel marks. At the unfinished obelisk, you can still see where workers pounded away with dolerite balls, leaving behind unmistakable grooves. Then there's the levitation myth, the idea that sound waves or anti-gravity devices lifted massive stones. It's a seductive image, but the reality is both simpler and more remarkable. Archaeologists have found ramps at sites like Hatnub, complete with post holes where workers anchored ropes to drag limestone blocks. These ramps weren't just inclines, they were complex systems with switchbacks and rest stations designed to distribute weight evenly. And if you need proof it worked, look no further than the Temple of Hatshepsut, where graffiti from a foreman named Jehuti still brags about hauling 2 colossal statues without a scratch. What fuels these alternate histories isn't just gaps in evidence, it's our own modern bias. We struggle to imagine feats requiring patience beyond quarterly profits or attention spans longer than a TikTok video. The idea that thousands of workers spent decades perfecting a single temple clashes with our era of instant gratification. But consider this: medieval cathedrals took centuries to build, and nobody credits their flying buttresses to alien architects. The difference: Europe kept meticulous guild records, while Egypt's knowledge was often passed orally, leaving voids where imagination rushes in. The irony is that the truth requires no embellishment. When you study the precision of Karnak's columns or the Serapeum's granite boxes, the real story isn't about missing technology, it's about the human capacity to refine simple tools to near perfection. A copper chisel might seem primitive, but in the hands of a master mason who's resharpened it 10,000 times, it becomes a precision instrument. Ropes and sledges might look crude, but when deployed by a workforce trained from childhood in the physics of friction, they're as effective as any crane. So why do these temples still defy explanation? Because we're not just measuring stone, we're measuring the limits of our own belief. It's easier to invent a lost super-civilization than to accept that ordinary people, armed with nothing but ingenuity and time, could create monuments meant to outlast the stars. And that's the most humbling truth of all. The greatest mystery isn't how they built these temples, it's how they built them better than we could with all our technology. They didn't need aliens, they just needed to think differently. The ancient Egyptians didn't just build temples, they wrote the first textbook on sustainable design, and today's architects are finally catching up. Walk through Dubai's solar-powered skyscrapers or Berlin's energy-efficient museums, and you'll spot ideas stolen straight from the banks of the Nile. Take passive cooling, for instance. The Egyptians didn't have air conditioning, but they didn't need it. At the Temple of Khonsu in Karnak, thick stone walls absorb heat during the day and release it slowly at night, creating a natural temperature swing that keeps interiors comfortable. Modern engineers call this thermal mass, and it's now a cornerstone of green building. The twist: today's architects pay thousands for synthetic phase change materials to mimic what sandstone did for free. Then there's solar alignment, ancient Egypt's answer to smart home technology. Temples like Abu Simbel weren't just oriented toward the sun for drama. Their carefully calculated angles maximized winter sunlight while shielding interiors from brutal summer heat. Contemporary architects have rediscovered this wisdom in solar-responsive design. The California Academy of Sciences in San Francisco uses roof overhangs calibrated to the sun's path, almost identical to the shadow-casting colonnades of Luxor. Even glass, that quintessentially modern material, has roots in Egyptian innovation. While they didn't have transparent windows, their use of translucent alabaster in temple sanctuaries created diffused lighting effects now replicated in eco-friendly offices worldwide. Material durability is where the lesson hits hardest. While modern concrete crumbles in decades, Egyptian granite and limestone have weathered millennia. The secret wasn't just the stone, it was how they used it. Their mortarless joints allowed for natural movement, a technique now revived in seismic zones. Japan's Skytree, the world's tallest freestanding tower, incorporates similar flexibility to withstand earthquakes. Even the U.S. Capitol's iconic dome owes its proportions to Egyptian geometry. Architect Thomas U. Walter explicitly modeled its curvature after the temples of Thebes, believing their perfect ratios created inherent stability. But the most profound lesson isn't technical, it's philosophical. In an era of disposable architecture where buildings are designed for 30-year lifespans, Egyptian temples stand as rebukes to short-term thinking. They remind us that true sustainability isn't about adding solar panels as an afterthought. It's about designing structures that harmonize with their environment from the ground up. When workers at the Temple of Edfu laid their foundation stones, they didn't just level the ground, they studied the Nile's flood patterns, the prevailing winds, even the angle of the winter sun. Every decision served both the present and the unimaginably distant future. That's why, from Singapore's vertical gardens to Copenhagen's carbon-neutral neighborhoods, the fingerprints of ancient Egypt are everywhere. Not as dusty relics, but as living proof that the best way forward might just be a 3,000-year-old idea. Build like you're answering to eternity. Staring at the weathered stones of Karnak today, it's hard to picture the explosion of color that once covered every surface, turquoise ceilings mimicking the heavens, ochre red walls glowing in torchlight, gilded hieroglyphs catching the sun. But with a swipe on a tablet, you can now step into a world where time rolls backward. Digital reconstructions like the Digital Karnak project don't just repaint the past, they resurrect it. Watch as augmented reality floods the hypostyle hall with its original cobalt and gold, or as holographic priests carry the bark of Ammon through corridors that collapsed centuries ago. This isn't fantasy, it's forensic revival where every pixel is backed by decades of archaeological research. The magic lies in the details. Take the Temple of Luxor's missing obelisks. Through 3D modeling, engineers virtually rebalanced the remaining obelisk's twin based on stress patterns in the granite, revealing how the originals might have been capped with electrum to reflect sunlight like beacons. At Dendera, spectral imaging uncovered faded pigments under soot layers, allowing artists to recreate the zodiac ceiling's original ultramarine, a color so expensive in antiquity. Its digital resurrection hints at the temple's staggering wealth. Even the sounds are being rebuilt. Acoustical simulations of the Abu Simbel sanctuary show how chanting priests exploited the stone's natural reverberation to create divine echoes. But these tools aren't just for awe, they're solving mysteries. When archaeologists debated how the Ramesseum's collapsed columns originally aligned, they fed fracture patterns into structural software. The digital rebuild revealed an intentional staggered layout designed to withstand earthquakes, a technique later found in Crete's Minoan palaces. Similarly, virtual crowd simulations at Edfu disproved old assumptions about public access. By tracking sight lines from the entrance to the inner shrine, researchers proved only select priests could see certain rituals, a hierarchy carved into the temple's very geometry. The most profound impact might be on conservation. Before touching a crumbling wall at Felin, teams now test interventions in virtual environments. Want to see if removing a 19th century graffiti layer would destabilize the 200-300-year-old pigment beneath. The simulation knows. At Medinet Habu, laser-scanned cracks in the battle reliefs alerted conservators to moisture damage invisible to the naked eye, guiding repairs that saved scenes of Ramses Roman III naval victories. Even climate change scenarios get modeled, predicting how rising humidity from the Aswan Dam might accelerate salt crystallization in temple stones over the next century. What's often overlooked is how these reconstructions humanize the past. Watching a digital work crew hall blocks up a reconstructed ramp at Giza, you notice their likely pace about 30 centimeters per pull and suddenly grasp the sweat behind each stone. Or observe how temple murals change under shifting daylight in a simulation, and you'll understand why certain rituals were timed to solar angles. This isn't just technology, it's time travel, bridging millennia with every pixel. And when you stand in an empty courtyard holding up your phone to see it fill with holographic worshippers, the past stops being abstract, it breathes. The irony, these temples, built to outlast eternity, are now being preserved by the very thing their builders never imagined: binary code. Yet in that paradox lies a poetic justice. The Egyptians carved their knowledge in stone, we're encoding it in light. And when a child in Cairo dons VR goggles to walk through a glowing, reconstructed Karnak, the circle closes. The temple's true purpose, to awe, to teach, to transcend time, is fulfilled in a way even the ancients might admire. After all, they didn't build for their present. They built for futures they'd never see, and now, through ones and zeros, we're keeping that promise alive. Even after centuries of meticulous study, the temples of ancient Egypt cling stubbornly to their secrets. Take something as seemingly simple as polishing granite. How did workers transform rough-cut slabs into surfaces so smooth they reflect like glass? Modern experiments with copper tools and quartz sand can produce similar finishes, but only after weeks of labor. Yet the Egyptians polished entire sarcophagi, some weighing 80 tons, with a consistency that suggests they possessed a faster, more efficient method. Were they using an unknown abrasive paste? Did they harness the Nile's silt, rich in fine quartz particles, as a natural polishing compound? The answer may lie in overlooked tomb paintings or buried workshop remains waiting to be discovered. Then there's the enigma of obelisk erection. While we've pieced together plausible theories, sand pits, counterweights, and gradual tilting, the exact sequence remains debated. A single miscalculation in lifting a 500-ton monolith would have been catastrophic, yet these needle-like stones stand flawlessly vertical after millennia. Recent discoveries at the Hatnub quarry, where archaeologists uncovered a ramp system with central staircases and post holes, hint at a sophisticated hauling technique. But the final act of raising these giants still eludes us. Were temporary sand mounds used as support? Did crews employ a pivot and lever system we haven't yet reconstructed? The absence of detailed records suggests these techniques were closely guarded guild secrets, passed down orally from master to apprentice, and lost when the last practitioner died. Even the tools themselves hold mysteries. At the unfinished obelisk site in Aswan, dolerite pounding stones litter the ground, their edges worn smooth from relentless use. Yet how did workers achieve such precision with these crude implements? Laser scans of finished obelisks reveal deviations of less than a millimeter over their entire length, a level of accuracy that rivals modern machining. Some researchers propose the use of guiding jigs or wooden templates, while others speculate about leveled water channels acting as giant spirit levels. The truth may be simpler but no less brilliant. Generations of artisans honing their craft to near instinctive perfection. Perhaps the greatest unanswered question isn't technical but philosophical. Why invest such unimaginable effort in structures meant to outlast time itself? The answer might lie in a fragmentary text from the Temple of Edfu, describing construction as joining earth to heaven. For the Egyptians, precision wasn't just engineering, it was devotion. Every perfectly fitted stone, every star-aligned corridor was a dialogue with the divine. And that's the ultimate puzzle, decoding not just how they built, but why they built so magnificently. With each new discovery, from hidden ramp systems to pigment recipes preserved in jar residues, we edge closer to understanding. Yet the temples still whisper there's more to learn. The temples of ancient Egypt stand not just as relics of the past, but as monuments to human creativity and perseverance. Without steel or silicon, their builders achieved precision that rivals modern engineering. Their secrets lie not in alien technology, but in observation, patience, and an unshakable belief in eternity. As climate change threatens our own cities, perhaps the greatest lesson these temples offer is this: true longevity comes from working with nature, not against it. Consider the way these structures breathe with the desert. Unlike modern concrete, which cracks under the sun's relentless gaze, Egyptian limestone expands and contracts with the heat, its microscopic gaps acting like shock absorbers. The temples don't fight the wind, they let it whistle through colonnades designed to dissipate its force. They don't resist the Nile's floods, they're built on foundations that rise above them. This harmony with the environment wasn't accidental, it was a philosophy carved into every stone. What's even more astonishing is how these lessons are being rediscovered today. Architects studying Karnak's natural cooling systems are applying similar principles to reduce energy use in skyscrapers. Engineers marvel at how the Serapeum's granite boxes withstand earthquakes, inspiring new seismic designs. Even the paint recipes mineral pigments that outlast synthetic colors by millennia are being analyzed for modern use. The past isn't just preserved here, it's teaching us how to build a better future. Yet beyond the engineering, there's something deeper in these stones, a reminder of what humans can achieve when we think beyond our own lifetimes. The workers who carved hieroglyphs at Luxor knew they'd never see the temple completed. The masons who shaped Abu Simbel statues understood their work would outlast empires. They built not for fame or profit, but for a vision of eternity that transcended individual lives. In an age obsessed with short-term gains, that perspective feels almost revolutionary. So the next time you see a photo of the great temple of Ammon, or watch sunlight strike Denderah's zodiac ceiling, remember, you're not looking at ruins. You're witnessing a conversation across time, one that challenges us to rethink what's possible. The Egyptians didn't have our technology, but they mastered something we're still learning: the art of building, not just for today, but for the unimaginable tomorrow. If this journey into the past has sparked your curiosity, let's keep the conversation going. Hit that like button if you learned something new. Subscribe for more deep dives into history's mysteries, and drop a comment below. What's the most mind-blowing fact you'll take away from Egypt's timeless temples? Your insights might just inspire our next adventure together. Until then, keep looking closely. The past has more to teach us than we ever imagined.